like to support the channel. Also, you can do it by way of Patreon, Anchor, the clothing store, and also the shoe shop that is listed in the comment description below. And again, thank you to any and all of you guys who have been here to support this channel during the 2+ year period. I wouldn't be able to do what I do every single day without you. So I just want to reiterate, because I know a lot of people tend not to make it through my whole full video, especially when it has a lot of information in there or reading or whatnot. The main point is this: the moment in time when things that they have created really starts to affect them, because this has been something that has been established and building up since the 1940s, and now it's coming to fruition, and now they see the effects where it's not just affecting the Black community, but now it's affecting them as well. Now they want to bring it up as an issue, and now they want everybody to be mad about the issue when it was solely them that created this issue, aka the government, from the get-go.
One of the things I see a lot in South Florida are people that have been in this country that maybe came from Cuba 45 years ago. They've worked here their entire lives. They retire. They get $800, $900, $1,000 a month from Social Security. And then they run into somebody who just got here from Cuba 3 months ago, is 29 years old, doesn't work, and is given $1,500 a month in benefits by our government because they're refugees. That refugee, a year later, is traveling back to Cuba 15 times. So you're a refugee fleeing oppression from a place that you now go back and visit 15 times the following year. And in the meantime, we're giving you Medicaid, food stamps, health care for your children, cash payments from the refugee fund. So imagine if you've been working here for 40 years and your Social Security check is smaller than the benefits going to a 28-year-old. Able-bodied person who just got here. That's real. That happens. That's happening every day. That makes no sense.
So the problem that he's talking about is something that is not of innocence and now. It is something that has been brewing for a very long time, and I have proof of that from this book. This is chapter 30 called No Americans. By counting the number of people who fled it, in Cuba, a lot of people left. The first year, more than 25,000 did. Another 60,000 did. The second, by the late 1960s, 1,500 Cubans were arriving in the United States every week. And by the late 1961, with the embassy in Havana already closed, an astonishing 1,200 people per working day were applying to the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service for entry. Between the start of the Cuban Revolution in January of 1959 and the missile crisis of October 1962, nearly 250,000 people left. Another wave followed, some of them even more concentrated. Numbers in the end give quantitative credence to the qualitative impression. The Cuban Revolution was nothing if not intense. At the very beginning, the people leaving were most likely closely allied to Batista. Then, as the new government began exporting property and reducing rent income, many of those who were adversely affected bought tickets to Miami. As the revolution radicalized, others opted to leave as well. By the time that they arrived in Florida, most hated Fidel Castro, but many had not started out that way. In a 1962 survey conducted in Miami, 22% of respondents confessed to having originally viewed Fidel Castro as Cuba's savior. The number was likely higher, as a few would have been eager to admit that view in Miami then. In fact, the city was full of people who had participated in one way or another in the struggle against Batista, whether in Castro's 26th of July movement or in other groups. The revolutionary government's first prime minister moved to Miami when he resigned, as did the first finance minister, among others. Professional and businessmen also left in droves. Over 6,000 doctors in Cuba in 1959. About half left for the United States. So did over 700 dentists out of almost 2,000. And 270 ergonomists out of 300. In 1961, more than two-thirds of the 1954 faculty at the University of Havana was living in Miami, and the senior medical faculty has shrunk from 200 to 17. These early Cuban exiles generally had much higher education levels than the Cuban population as a whole. 36% had at least some college education, while only about 4% had that among the Cuban population generally. Not everyone welcomed Cubans to Miami. Anglo Miamians, who wrote letters to editors complaining about their new neighborhoods, apartment buildings began posting signs that read, quote, "No children, no pets, no Cubans." Merchants complained that Cubans only wanted to do business with other Cubans. "It's unbelievable how the Cubans could push out the Americans so quickly," remarked one. That phenomena was not limited to business. The garment sector labor force went from 94% to just 18% non Hispanic white in less than 10 years. The difference due almost entirely to newly arrived Cubans. Perhaps no one felt as pushed out by the Cuban arrivals as brusquely as black Miamians. Little Havana sat across the Miami River from Overtown, the city's historic black neighborhood since the 1890s. Miami belonged to the Jim Crow South, and as African Americans watched Cubans ensconce themselves there, they noted all kinds of contradictions. At a time and place in which racial segregation was rampant, they observed how almost all Cubans, often no matter their skin color, became white.
Being white, blue eyes, and Cuban. The white and the blue eyes played to my advantage because it allowed me to get in with guards down. He's too hip hop for Latin, he's too English, he's too Spanish, he's too white, he's too this, he's too that. Another one.
Yes. You know, when I say this, like, I got green eyes and I'm white, they look at me like I'm crazy.
Now everybody is seeing what I have seen for the last couple years.
Sometimes it happened at the very moment of arrival. When they registered at the refugee center downtown, people received hotel vouchers if they needed them. Almost all but the very darkest refugees received vouchers for white hotels. Miami beaches were just as segregated. Some were restricted to whites, others to blacks, but Cubans, many used either beach. Reported Look magazine back in April of 1959. Cuban children, almost no matter their complexion, were allowed to go to white public schools, which were invariably better resourced than their black counterparts. In 1961, a local black minister speculated that African Americans in Miami could solve the problem of school segregation simply by teaching their children to speak only Spanish. Such observations aside, black leaders consistently emphasized that their problem was not with the new arrivals themselves, but with the preferential treatment given to them by the government. As the head of Miami's Urban League insisted, quote, "We're not angry at the Cubans, but at the system that will do more for outsiders than for its own citizens." Accordingly, the Immigration and Naturalization Service gave Cubans temporary legal status. Then, near the end of its term, Eisenhower established the Cuban Refugee Emergency Center to coordinate relief to Cuban arrivals. The program, renamed and explained by Kennedy, gave Cubans access to all kinds of resources: work permits, job training, English classes, small loans, subsidized childcare, housing assistance, and job referrals. Access to those benefits allowed Cubans to work for lower wages than others, sometimes for as little as half the wage garnered by their black counterparts. One reported estimate that between 1959 and 1962, 12,000 African Americans lost jobs to Cubans. Sometimes it was the United States government itself that gave the Cubans employment. In the early 1960s, the CIA had 12,000 Cubans on its payroll, making it one of the largest employers in the state of Florida. In fact, the CIA's largest station in the world, outside of its headquarters in Langley, Virginia, was located in Miami. The agency also controlled more than 50 front businesses, a large number of them in Little Havana. These were CIA owned, Cuban exile run travel agencies, gun shops, real estate offices, and alike. Such ventures, quote, helped exiles hone their entrepreneurial skills and boosted them economically, though they did nothing to topple Castro. In the assistance from the United States government, not only cultural capital or up by the bootstraps determination that made the early exiles golden. So we're only dealing with facts here. So people don't want to get emotional or want to say, "Oh, but this person isn't actually." I don't care what you're stating. I'm going by what was written in black and white, and I'm also going by the people who were here before me. Right. So here we have Hector Garcia, founder of the American GI Forum. He stated this: by the early 1950s, the American GI Forum, while still denying that it was a civil rights organization, sought to end discrimination in Texas schools, in employment, and in the use of public spaces. The core strategy depended on educating Anglos that Americans of Spanish speaking descent or Latin Americans were Caucasian, and that to identify them as anything but white, whether on a birth certificate or a traffic citation, was illegal. Making any distinction between Latin Americans and whites, he wrote, was a slur, an insult to all Latin Americans of Spanish descent. Okay, so all the evidence that I have stated is to, in a sense, say that he is correct up until a point, right? So everything that he stated about being elderly in the United States, getting about, let's say, six, eight, or $1,000 per month is correct. But then you have refugees or you have immigrants that will come directly over. They will get sometimes as little as 12 or 1,500 or upwards to about $9,000, depending on the state that you are in. And it's amazing that you would have such a government that would opt to be more beneficial to those coming in versus to those who have given over everything. But again, this is a long time coming. This is something that America has been doing. I'm not sure why a lot of people are so much excited about this when historically this has been happening since before a lot of us were actually in existence. The United States government has always provided more for the immigrants. This is why I read directly from the book, and it stated to you that the government was doing everything to be beneficial to immigrants coming directly over versus the working class Black Americans that were there that were just trying to be a part of the America that doesn't like them, that does not want them there. They were still trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They were still trying to work as Americans. They were still trying to be side by side. They were still trying to follow the laws, follow the orders. But you didn't hear of them getting housing vouchers, hotel vouchers, child care help or vouchers. You didn't hear of the CIA, another government, part of the government, backing them up, backing their storefronts, pouring money directly into their community. Like I said, there was a lot of things going on and transpiring. But circling back to that date, even during that time when the Cubans were coming over, the Anglo Miamians were having an issue because their businesses weren't flourishing because of the immigrants, right? And the immigrants were not trying to circulate money within their communities. So the Anglos had a huge problem with the Cubans. They wouldn't have had so much of a problem if the Cubans wanted to work side by side and wanted to, really have money fluctuating specifically and only to their side. But because the Cubans were like, hey, we know each other. We know where we came from. We're going to be beneficial. The same culture that we have back in Cuba, we're going to carry that on here. They even did the same thing to the Black community, but it hurt them even worse. Not only were the Cubans not circulating money in the Black community, but they were also inevitably taking jobs because it cost a lot less to hire Cubans than what it would be to hire a skilled Black man during that time to do the exact same job. And again, like I gave you the evidence before, you have both Fat Joe and Mr. Worldwide that stated what? They're both have blue eyes or green eyes and they have white skin. What is that telling you? I also gave you what Hector Garcia also stated about how anybody that speaks Spanish should be called white. If they are called anything else but that, then they have a problem. So again, this is the America that they have been working towards, that they have been creating for a very, very long time. This has been in the pipeline for a long time. It's just now coming to fruition. So again, you can go back to the 1940s. You can go back to the 50s. You can go back to the 60s. You can go back to those 3 decades and see how the building blocks were already established so that everything would transition and be how it is today. But anyways, let me know what you guys think about this video and everything that I stated in the comment description below. And as always, peace, love, and stay tuned for the next video.